Welcome into the Commanders Report. I'm your host, Jack Sperry, and today I have my updated list of round one draft targets for your Washington Commanders, going through every single position group that I think GM Adam Peters and head coach Dan Quinn could target, and when their selection comes up in Green Bay on night one at pick number 29 overall. But before we get into my list today, go ahead and click that subscribe button if you haven't already for in-depth Commanders draft coverage all throughout the 2025 NFL draft season. We got in-depth prospect analysis. We're going to be talking about a lot of the top draft targets for the Commanders today. We got positional rankings that are going to be coming up here in the weeks to come at all the top positions of need for the Washington Commanders. Of course, sleeper picks, mid-round picks are also going to be coming up later in the process as well. We have weekly mock drafts on this channel. My next mock draft will be dropping later this week. And then also draft pick breakdowns every time the Commanders make a pick during the NFL draft itself this year. It's all 100% free to join, guys, for the most extensive Commanders draft coverage anywhere on YouTube. Make sure you click that subscribe button right now. Now, before we start here, I will say that maybe my number one first-round draft target is not a draft prospect at all. I would rather spend this pick on a trade to go out and get the edge rusher Trey Hendrickson. That is, if you can get him for a pretty decent contract number. Now, if it's going to cost $40 million or anything really over $38 million to get Trey Hendrickson here to Washington, I might not be as interested in making this deal, but I would be willing to part ways with the first round pick this year here in Washington if it means you can get Trey Hendrickson, a game-changing presence at the edge rusher position, for a price tag that makes sense for this football team. So with that in mind here, let's take a look at the round one position groups that I think GM Adam Peters and Dan Quinn will be looking at. Edge rusher, wide receiver, cornerback, safety, and offensive tackle, I think, are probably the five position groups where I could see somebody possibly from that position group being taken with the Commanders' first overall selection in this year's draft. Some positions I won't be talking about today that maybe I've seen around, Commanders Twitter, having people at these positions in round one. Running back, I don't think is going to be a possibility. I think they like Brian Robinson Jr. I think they like Austin Eckler. And I think they like Jeremy McNichols and Chris Rodriguez Jr. as their kind of supplementary piece in the running back room as well. Also, defensive tackle, I think that they paid Javon Kinlaw what they paid him for a reason. I think they drafted Jerzon Newton in the second round last year for a reason, and obviously they're paying Daron Payne what they're paying him. Plus, they brought back Sheldon Day, and that room is pretty filled out right now. So maybe they'll take one later in the draft, but I'm not sure if it'll be in round one like I've seen in some recent mock drafts. Offensive guard, I think that if they want a guard to play left guard for them heading into next year, I think they can get one of those in the later rounds. And then inside linebacker, I think is another position this team could take in the middle to late rounds, but probably not in the first. And, if there is no Trey Hendrickson trade and, that doesn't end up happening, and let's say Hendrickson signs a brand new deal with the Cincinnati Bengals, which apparently is in the works as we speak right now, I would say look for the Washington Commanders to prioritize edge rusher in round one, because if you don't get that game-changing presence as a veteran piece there in Trey Hendrickson, you got to get that future number one presence at edge rusher in the draft, and you're probably going to have to spend that first-round draft pick in order to make that happen. So the six guys that I could see potentially falling to the Commanders at number 29, James Pierce Jr. out of Tennessee and Mike Green are kind of the top two guys to keep your eye on, in my opinion, because you look at James Pierce and you look at Mike Green, they are incredible players on film, explosive players. James Pierce, in particular, at the Combine this year was phenomenal. Mike Green, super twitchy player with great bend around the edge, and he's got finesse moves as well and underrated power. But both of those guys have some off-field concerns that might drive them down the draft board a little bit and right into the lap of Adam Peters and Dan Quinn. And those guys can be legitimate number one presences in this league, in my opinion. But also, guys like Mykel Williams. It's going to be interesting to see where Mykel goes, because some people think he's going to be a top 15 pick. Some people think he's going to be taken late round one. So will Williams end up making it to the Commanders late round one? I guess we'll see, but he is a long-levered guy that I think has a bright future in this league. Then I'm going to completely butcher this name here, but the kid out of Boston College, Donovan Azirugaku. Oh, goodness gracious, producer Joey, I probably just butchered Izaraku. There we go. But let me tell you, man, I might not be able to pronounce his name, but I know what I'm seeing on his film, man. He is explosive. He is super productive. I think he's going to be a great player in this league right away. He might be a little bit undersized for what the Commanders are usually looking for in their edge rushers, but hey, production is production, and I think that he's an athletic freak. Then you got Shamar Stewart, who a lot of people are starting to expect to be a top 20 draft pick because of his sheer size and power and athleticism. Trayvon Walker ended up being the number 1 overall pick in his draft class because of the complete package physically that he brought to the table. Shamar Stewart is a very similar type of package there that I could see being pushed up draft boards. And then the other guy out of Texas A&M, Nick Scorton, really good run defender, could certainly be in play for the Commanders at number 29 as well. So if the Commanders do end up taking an edge rusher in round 1, I think it's going to be one of these 6 gentlemen. So what say you guys? Let me know down there in the comment section. What's the percent chance that Washington takes an edge rusher in round 1 this year? Put it on a scale of 0 to 100 for me down there in the comment section for today's pinned comment. For me personally, guys, I'd put it at around a 60 or maybe even more percent chance that it ends up being an edge rusher this year, because I do think Trey Hendrickson and the Bengals have a pretty decent chance of getting the deal done. And if that's the case, as we talked about, I think the pick will probably end up being an edge rusher. So let me know what you guys think down there in the comment section for today's pinned comment. YouTube's going to throw you an ad break here in just a couple of seconds. And when that happens, give me a percent chance an edge rusher is the Commanders' pick in round 1. Now let's talk a little bit about wide receiver, because let's say they trade for Trey Hendrickson, all right? And you don't really need to get a true number 1 edge rusher now. I think wide receivers is a position that could make some sense for the Washington Commanders. And you might be saying, Jack, they just gave Deebo Samuel a restructured contract and they just sent a 5th-round pick for his services. They're going to be giving Terry McLaurin probably a big contract extension this offseason. Why would they spend a 1st-round draft pick on a wide receiver? Well, the answer to that is McLaurin and Deebo are kind of older wide receivers, veteran options, and maybe they want to get their future number 1 wide receiver to develop alongside Jaden Daniels in this offense, and kind of phase out McLaurin and Deebo in the years to come and turn to this new number 1 wide receiver. And there's some good receivers that could be available for the Washington Commanders in the 1st round. Somebody like Emeka Egbuka, who's kind of being pigeonholed as kind of like a non-X receiver. He can't play X, so you shouldn't take him with a top 20 pick. I think he's an awesome player. I think he's going to probably play in the slot right away, but he can play Z as well. He's a ready-made NFL pro wide receiver with great hands, great yard after the catch ability, and phenomenal route running. So if he makes it to number 29, he can slot in as this team's slot receiver immediately. And I think that he's got some, and he'd be with this team for the next decade plus. And Luther Burden III is actually somebody that I am a big fan of, but a lot of people have even falling out of round 1. I think Field Yates, Daniel Jeremiah, and Mel Kiper Jr. all have Luther Burden III falling out of the 1st round entirely in their latest mock drafts. When you watch him on film, I just don't see why. I mean, this guy is a phenomenal route runner. He's phenomenal after the catch. He can make contested catches at his size, which you don't see very often. He's a tough as nails player. And, his ability to make plays with the ball in his hand in open space is just special. So I would be thrilled to have him here in Washington. Jaden Higgins out of Iowa State, I do actually think is going to end up being a 1st-round wide receiver because of how fluid he moves. He reminds so many people of Nico Collins, and we all know how good Nico Collins is for the Houston Texans. I think Jaden Higgins is going to be a really good player in this league, and I think he ends up going round 1. Will it be to the Commanders? We shall see. I also really like Alec Ayamaner out of Stanford, who reminds me a lot of Keenan Allen when he was coming out. Bigger receiver that is super, super fluid, runs great routes. And he's really the only wide receiver I saw on film that absolutely dominated Travis Hunter in a one-on-one matchup when these two linked up. And then somebody to keep your eye on as kind of a dark horse here is Trey Harris out of Ole Miss, who I think, when you compare his numbers to Matthew Golden, who could be the 1st wide receiver taken in this year's draft class, Harris's numbers are actually more efficient and better than Golden's were last year. And Harris, just like Golden, is an athletic freak. He's not 4.29 or whatever level speed crazy fast, but he's a big body that can run fast. He's good after the catch. I think that he's a better route runner than people give him credit for, and he's got a contested catch rate over 60%. So I think Trey Harris is somebody to really keep your eye on, and somebody that's a deep threat that can also be a really good run blocker and really good after the catch piece as well for the Washington Commanders. So coming up here on the Commanders Report, more round 1 draft targets for your Washington Commanders. We got more positions to talk about here in just 1 second. But first, I want to tell you about our sponsor today at Turtle Beach Headsets. And I'm actually wearing a Turtle Beach headset today. We are in the Turtle Beach studio here at Chat Sports. It's a brand new Turtle Beach headset studio where we are doing our videos for the week here at the Commanders Report. And I absolutely love these headphones, guys, because they're wireless. You just press a button, it automatically connects to your console, whether it's Xbox, whether it's PlayStation. And, whether you're more of a first-person shooter guy or a sports video game type of guy, I know the show just released. You guys can hear every single little detail that the makers of these games wanted you to hear inside these headphones. And the thing about the earmuffs, and they might make me look a little weird here with the big mouse ears or whatever, but they are super comfortable. And I tell you what, guys, you can wear these for 4 or 5 hours playing video games with your buddies, and you're not even going to feel a thing. So right now, head on over to turtlebeach.com, use code CHAT for 10% off your entire order. That's 10% off your order at turtlebeach.com with promo code CHAT. After your purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show by telling them that we sent you here at the Commanders Report by Chat Sports. Get the ultimate immersive gaming experience with Turtle Beach today. Again, head on over to turtlebeach.com. Use code CHAT for 10% off your entire order. A big thank you to Turtle Beach Headsets for sponsoring today's edition of the Commanders Report. So the reason why the Commanders might take a cornerback here, and this has been kind of a popular pick among the top NFL draft analysts out there, is because right now the Washington Commanders are really relying on two veteran corners that had down seasons last year to bounce back. Marshawn Lattimore and Jonathan Jones are two guys that have been very good corners traditionally, but last year definitely had down years. So what are the odds that both of them end up having legit bounce back seasons? You could argue maybe not very good, and at least one of those corners is not going to be playing very well, which is why you might want to plan for the future a little bit by using your first round selection on a really good cornerback. Personally, guys, I think the person that could still be there at number 29 that I really like the film of is Trey Amos out of Ole Miss. Now, maybe I'm just an Ole Miss kind of stan here because we talked about Trey Harris, and I love Trey Harris. But I also love Trey Amos. I think that he's a big body with long arms, super physical, and his ability to mirror and man coverage down the field is really, really good as well. Really like Trey Amos's film. I think he's going to end up going in round 1. But somebody that's been a popular name at number 29 as well has been Maxwell Harrison out of Kentucky. Long arms, fastest 40 time out of anybody at the combine this year at 4.28, absolutely blazing. And he's got great instincts both in man and zone coverage. He's got good foot speed. I think he's a ready-made NFL corner the second that you draft him. Azariah Thomas is another guy that's been mocked to the Commanders in round 1 quite a bit as well. Long, physical corner that really fits the mold of what Dan Quinn and Joe Witt Jr. typically like in their starting corners. Benjamin Morrison is a man specialist. The Commanders want to play a lot of man. So if you're looking for somebody that's going to come in right away and be comfortable playing a lot of man coverage, Benjamin Morrison out of Notre Dame is an option. Then Siobhan Revel Jr. Now, Revel is somebody that hasn't been testing, and because of that, hasn't really been getting a lot of buzz lately. I think he's probably going to be more of a day 2 prospect and a day 2 target for the Commanders, but he has the long arms and he's got the physical skill set that NFL teams look for in their number 1 corners. So maybe this team takes a shot and falls in love with him. Then another position that they could potentially take here is offensive tackle. And the reason why they may go tackle is if they don't believe in Andrew Wiley long-term at right tackle, and their preference is to go with Brandon Coleman at left guard. Now, we still don't know for sure whether Dan Quinn plans on putting Coleman at left guard or right tackle, but if the plan is to put him at left guard and to replace Andrew Wiley at right tackle in the future, guys like Josh Simmons, Kelvin Banks Jr., and Josh Connerly Jr. are 3 guys that I think can realistically be there for the Washington Commanders at number 29 and would be phenomenal picks. Now, Simmons, I think, will probably be off the board. Now, he does have an injury history, which might drive him down the board a little bit here, but I think he might end up being a top 20 pick. Kelvin Banks Jr. has been somebody that's been falling down draft boards a little bit with the ascendance of guys like Josh Simmons and Armin Membu out of Missouri, but Banks can play on both sides of the line if you need him to. He'd be playing left tackle here in Washington. And he's got some really good movement skills that I think that the Commanders would really appreciate. And then Josh Connerly Jr., maybe, he's not the biggest guy in the world. He can get bull rushed a little bit, doesn't have the greatest power or anchor, but he can move really, really well. And he's a really, really polished pass protector. So for an offense that likes to run a lot of screens, get their offensive line out to block, and then also, they're going to be passing a lot. Josh Connerly Jr. is a pass protecting specialist. Makes a lot of sense for the Washington Commanders as well. Then the final position that we'll talk about today is safety. And the reason why they might go safety is because they lost Laremy Chin, a 220-pound athletic freak of a strong safety that was a perfect fit for this defense. He ends up taking a pretty big payday with the Las Vegas Raiders. And then the Commanders bring in Will Harris, who's okay, but I see him more of as a third rotational piece than an every down starter at strong safety. So a couple guys to keep your eye on here. Malachi Starks out of Georgia, really good football player. Reminds me a lot of Brian Branch and Cooper DeJean in the fact that he's somebody that because he didn't test amazingly at the NFL Combine in terms of the sheer athleticism, he's being put down draft boards a lot right now, but phenomenal ball skills, solid tackler, versatility, can play in the slot if you need him to, can play, center field if you need him to, free safety, or you can put him in the box as well. Phenomenal football player, and versatile chess pieces like that are very valuable in NFL circles today. Then another potential versatile chess piece at safety is Nick Emmanwori out of South Carolina, who got a perfect 10 out of 10 relative athletic score at the safety position. I believe the only other safety in history that's done that is Laremy Chin. So if you're looking for a Laremy Chin replacement, Nick Emmanwori does make a lot of sense. He's a decent run defender, even though I think that his tackling ability needs to get a lot better. I think that he takes poor angles to rushers at times. I think the film is very underwhelming for a guy that would probably be your day one starter at strong safety. So personally, I would rather go with Malachi Starks if he's still available at number 29. He's a hell of a football player, and I think he's more ready to go and be a day one starter than Nick Emmanwori is. But both of these guys are certainly on the table for the Commanders in round one. So who's your guy? Let me know down there in the comment section. Who are you hoping that the Commanders take in round one this year? Is it a edge rusher? Is it a receiver? Is it a corner? Is it a safety? Is it an offensive tackle? Let me know what you guys think down there in the comments section. Can't wait to hear the answers that you give to me down there in the comments. That'll be it for today's show, guys. Make sure you click that subscribe button if you haven't already. Later this week, I'll be revealing my latest Commanders mock draft after the first 2 weeks of NFL free agency have passed, and one of the players on this list will be my first round pick for the Commanders in that mock draft. So make sure you guys click that subscribe button right now to see which guy I have as my preference for the Commanders later this week.